Welcome to the Healing Centered Conversations podcast, where we create space for conversations that heal. I'm your host, Dr. Byron McClure, a nationally certified school psychologist. I, along with our special guests, will give you insight to promote collective healing by putting people first. Through weekly conversations with educators, psychologists, and healers, we'll discuss ways to heal, thrive, and live your best life. This is the Healing Center Conversations podcast. Welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Byron McClure, and today we have a very special guest in the building, Big Doc Energy, aka Dr. Riana Elyse Anderson. Welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast. I'm happy to have you.
As a Detroiter, I would greet you with our what up, though?
What up, though?
What up, though? Hello.
Yeah, super hyped to have you on. For those of you out there who might not be familiar with our special guest today, you are a daughter of Detroit, a mental health maven, a carb connoisseur. For a decade, you've been working with Black youth and families from South Central LA all the way to Southwest Detroit on ways to dropkick racism and engage in resistance for a healthy mind, body, and spirit. How are you? Before we even get into it, how are you?
I am exhausted. So as you can see from the reindeer antlers, we are at the start of the holiday time, which means we've got a few days before the break. And what I've learned is that, well, what I said last year is, how do you break when you've been broken? Like, if you just feel broken down and your body ain't got nothing left, what does that break even look like? So I've really been trying to focus on restoring and healing, to your podcast name, versus just having a break, because it ain't sufficient enough, right? So that's where I'm at. I'm at the start of beginning the Unwind process, and I really look forward to that in the next few days of restoring.
Awesome. And I think that's so important, that we can't just break, we have to restore, we have to heal. And I'm hoping that we get into all things healing today on this Healing Centered conversation. But before we do, we have a lot to discuss. I saw something on social media, and I gotta ask you, which is it? Is it
Don't.
she's 5'2" or she's 5'2"? Which one is it?
First, do you have Lloyd on speaker? Because we need the answers, and Lloyd is choosing violence every time he answers this question. He's like, yeah, it could be whatever it is that you want. And I'm like, little Lloyd, don't do this. Here's the thing. I actually think controversially he says both. And I've put my ear to the streets on the speaker. I put the speaker like right here. And I'm like, I swear to God, he's going between the two. So I'm going to just hedge and say he's saying both.
He's saying both. You know, it's funny. I watched an interview with him on The Breakfast Club. Then I saw another, I think it was like an IG story or something he had posted. And he gave that like super cliche answers, both. Like, which one's your favorite child? Like both of them. Like, no, like you have a favorite. Which one is it? What's the first? So, but we'll let that rock. We'll let that rock. But for those who don't know, and I read a brief bio, but who are you? In your own words. That's such a deep philosophical question, but in your perspective and your experience, who is Riana?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I always say, and it was the first thing that you said when you introduced me, to know me is to know Detroit, and to know how much I ride for and love my city, and what it took for me to be here. Something that I realized as I got older. So I'm biracial, I'm Black and Greek. It didn't occur to me until I was in Greektown this summer that there would only be a few cities that you could have my mix be something that people understood or would even accept. And a few cities for which that would even be a thing. So maybe Detroit, maybe Chicago. But then to have two educators who met in a space to have this child and to raise her in the city with a Black mother, it's really, again, getting smaller and smaller with where that could be. And then to send me to these types of schools and to continue the work that I've done, to be exposed to some of the things that I've been exposed to get me to where I want to go. it could only be Detroit. That's the only place that I could have grown up to understand these specific nuggets of white flight, of educational inequality, of again being biracial in the blackest city in the US. Like, if understanding these specific phenomena could only be in Detroit. So whenever I introduce myself, that is such an important part of me and my story that I have to start there. So that's who I am. I'm a Detroiter, a daughter of Detroit, someone who understands resilience and grit, not in the psych literature
Mm-hmm.
way, because I don't like the way that it's written in either one of those. We can come back to that, but in a way that says, you've tried so much to bury our city, to count it out, to discount it, to do all of the damage in the media, and yet we're here and we're thriving and we are showing what it looks like to withstand all of that force against us. And that's who I am.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I would love for you to just share a little bit more about what it was like for you growing up in Detroit. Because we hear a lot of things about the city and it's a lot of stereotypes, but for you, how was it growing up in the city?
Oftentimes you don't know that anything is wrong or different when you're smack in the middle of something. So for me, I was a kid in a candy store. I loved it. I had such a great time with my friends. I had such a loving community of friends, their parents, family. And it's again this reason of why I'm looking at some of the things that I do now as a researcher is like, all right, my family told me you can't turn the corner. You have to be on the block at this time, when the lights are on. It was all these things to keep me safe. And I was loved and well supported and taken care of. And the overwhelming experience of people who I grew up with was similar, but I know that that's not the case for everyone. So I started looking at what are these protective factors in urban environments that help to facilitate children's wellness. That was, again, why I started even asking those questions. And it wasn't until started going further and further away from Detroit that I learned about, wow, we had relatively fewer services and things to do than other people. Like, that's interesting that when I see that building that's well resourced, that's just 15 minutes outside of the Detroit border, we would never have something like that in our city. When we went to go play sports, we had to either share the gym with another sport, or I played tennis. We went to tennis courts that had glass or syringes or like whatever on it. But like, that's what they thought the quote best high school students in Detroit were worth. When you look at our city governance structure and how money was shelled out per kiddo. But again, 15 minutes away, I'm like, look at that building. Look at the opportunity that they had. And yet we're both still going to University of Michigan. And
Mm-hmm.
yet I'm
Right.
now getting this PhD. And like, that for me, again, as much of a challenge as some people perceive it to be, that was something that helped me to withstand some of the challenges that I faced later on in life. And again, I felt well protected, well supported as a young person.
Yeah, and that's so important, everything that you mentioned. And I grew up in PG County, which is right outside of DC, and predominantly African American. And I recall like some feeling some of those same experiences too. It's like you go 15, 20 minutes in either direction. If you go south of where I grew up, you're in Southern Maryland, which at that time was predominantly white. It's like, man, they have all these resources here. And it's like, we can't tap into that. Even when you look at the community, like before we got like the National Harbor and the MGM, like we had to drive 30 minutes just to make it to the mall. Like we didn't even have a mall
Exactly.
like where we are. It's like, but we're still competing. Like we're still like crushing y'all in sports. We're still out competing in college and all of those things. So like we're able to thrive in spite of.
Oh, I know. And just imagine for a moment, again, your listeners may be coming from a variety of backgrounds. So just imagine for a moment when we're thinking about children and you have nothing and you're able to do all the things, right? Imagine what would have happened had they had resources. So I think about that with what you just said about the mall. We had the same story with the mall, but we also were known at one point as the only major city without a grocery store. So when I grew up, knowing that I would get food from the gas station or this store that sold foods that were expired or close to it or, prepackaged and all that stuff, that I would have to, if I didn't have my mother's car, take several buses to get fresh food. Like when you think about that and what food as one thing does to the mind and the body of a developing child, That's one area, right, that we were, quote, lacking in. What would have happened if my body and mind had been nourished the way that it was supposed to, or for any of these other elements of me? So it's so important when we start to use words about who those children are to be mindful of that system that is developing, or in a lot of ways, decompressing that child, making them challenged in some of the ways that we sometimes put blame on that child.
Absolutely. Like we can't blame the individual child. We have to look at the systemic structures that are in place. And in your work and your studies, you went on to study a lot of the things that we're looking at now. And part of that, you're a licensed clinical psychologist, right? Yeah, shout out
Yep.
to the clinical psychs out there. And it's important that in your work that you always strive to improve outcomes for Black youth and youth of color. So I'm interested to hear in your perspective growing up in Detroit, like where we are now and everything that's going on. It was funny. I saw an Instagram post and it was someone translating like when Black folks talk, like what they really mean. And one of them, when they say with everything going on. And I say that like, and when we say with everything going on, we're talking about like the pandemic, COVID, like racism, all of those things. It's just
Yeah.
this saying. But with
Yeah.
everything going on, like what do you see as the future of mental health for Black youth?
It's a big one. So, and it's one that I had to answer last week. I'm a part of this National Black Child Development Policy Initiative, and we have to think for the next year and a half of our work, what is it that we want to do? So I've had to look at some of the policy initiatives that are coming through right now. And I never want to say the pandemic was good, right? But as a believer and as someone who does not believe that things happen on accident, right? That there is purpose in something that we're experiencing. Looking at some of policies that are starting to develop around where we need to have mental health services, the ways that it's provided, insurance coverage. There are so many elements that, because of all the things going on, like everything going on around us, right? Like there's a recognition that there are so many needs that we need to meet, and there are ways that we had been failing to provide those needs before this point. So I see the future certainly being a place where schools are better trained and able to provide some of these services, that at the very least they can refer out. And that when we provide services in communities, we've got quality care that will be provided. We've got insurance that will understand that 4 sessions are insufficient for some people. So we can have unlimited sessions. We can have a reduced or no copay for children, and that we're able to think outside of even this proverbial box. So I am a clinician, I am an interventionist. And so sometimes that means that I'm in the middle. And when you introduced me, you use the word dropkick, and it's something that I started sharing with my students, because we have the X and the Y. We've got these problems, these outcomes, and we have things that lead to those problems. And my job is to annihilate, eviscerate, dropkick, whatever this is in the middle. But I'm gonna get tired one day. My leg ain't gonna kick the same way, Dr. McClure. And so I need people to not do that thing to the kids in the first place. How can we take that X out the equation in the first place? So my hope for mental health outcomes is that we don't need to rely on all of the provision of services, that is the drop kicking stuff, that we can actually target what is the problem in the first place. That is racism, that is educational inequality, that is nutritional inequality, that is residential segregation. These are these social determinants of health that are leading to problems that our children are facing in the first place.
Yeah, and I asked you that question because I knew you were going to give a prolific answer like that. And I tried to do my research, but I didn't even know that you were working on that task force or committee before. But I think what you said is spot on. And because you are an innovator, a thought leader in this space, you've been recognized for that work. And you made the list of the Root 100, which is an annual list of the most influential African Americans who are innovators, leaders, public figures, and game changers. Big Doc energy.
I'm just hiding behind these questions.
No, look, you gotta have that energy out. What did this recognition mean to you?
Oh man. So here's what's super funny. I hate being recognized for stuff, and I hate like telling people. So I'm working with some media folks and PR folks who are like sweetie, you actually have to tell when things are happening. So we submitted the application this summer, and I went on to Twitter one day and I just saw my mentions were blown. I said, what is going on? Why is Twitter ablaze right now? And so the Root had just dropped this announcement and they hadn't told us. They just put it on Twitter. That was the way that I found out, unless it went to spam and I just didn't see it. But to answer your question, it makes me so uncomfortable. And I think because in our communities, we've been told to be humble for so long. Just keep your head down, just keep grinding, keep working. And I was raised by Southern grandparents. So the ethos of just being humble, just do the work has been such a part of who I am. But ironically, and we had started chatting about this a little bit before with respect to how God has been speaking to me lately and how some of the services that I've been listening to have touched me. But I've heard several messages lately that have said, if God gives you a gift, you can't hide it, you can't sit on it, you can't throw it away. You have to operate in your gift. And I know that for such a time as this, I have been put on this earth, that there is no coincidence that I'm in a school of public health in a city that was hit the hardest in Detroit as a clinician for Black people. There's no coincidence that all of this has happened the way that it did. And tangentially, but I'll try to wrap it up, I came from LA to Detroit. And one of my biggest fears in doing that was that, oh my God, I have an opportunity to be in LA at USC, this school that is known for their comm school. You're leaving this media space and you're going to Detroit. Who's going to see you in Detroit? That's what I asked when I left. You're going to be hidden. And then a year and a half later, your living room becomes your studio. So it didn't matter where you were. And then I was able to open up that computer and film and record and do work that people could understand. And God's gift through me was, how do you translate what people need to know about everything going on to your people, right? In ways that someone from the Root up to CNN and everybody in between is going to understand. So I've been trying to accept this recognition more and to tell people about the things that are going on in my life. But because the work is about the babies, it is sometimes very hard to have a focus on myself, honestly.
Yeah, I get it. It's tough. In fact, I was speaking with someone earlier today about that exact thing. And one of the things that I had to learn, and that I'm honestly still learning, is that sometimes that recognition isn't just for you. And
Right.
if you prescribe to this collective approach, that's for all of us. And
Yeah.
if we're not, you, myself, if we're not letting people know the things that we've done, then we're not going to allow those people who otherwise wouldn't see it, to partake in that. And whether it be for the ancestors, whether it be for your mother, sister, brother, cousin, that's their recognition as well. And it might seem unrelated, but I remember when I first got my doctorate and people were like, what do we call you? And I was in the meeting, I was like, Byron, I'm the same Byron. And it was another brother at that time, and he has a doctorate as well. He was like, don't ever do that again. I was like, yo, I've never seen him this serious before. And I was like, what's up? Man, he was like, you have to say that you are Dr. McClure. And I was like, man, that's arrogant. That's not me. I don't want to do that. But he was like, it's not for you. Oh, you thought this was about you. It's not for you. But look at those students who are in those IEP meetings with you and the parents with you. They need to see a Black male who has a doctorate and to hear a Dr. McClure. And you can have those conversations. So that really, it kind of humbled me to where I thought I wouldn't be humble, but it really put me in a good position to know that it's not me, it's we.
That's right.
But it's hard, right? It's tough. So
I flow with the doctor a lot easier than I do other things because I'm like, oh no, baby girl has worked. Oh, you gonna call me, especially Comcast. When you call this phone, it's going to be Dr. Anderson. Don't call me no Miss Nothing. That is Dr. Anderson, Comcast and Sprint.
Yes. I love it. And I heard you kind of mention a little bit earlier something about a TED Talk or something there. Ooh. I would love, I'm putting everything out there. I'm putting it all out there. But you had a TED Talk. And you can say something now, and you can tell people once you finish dropping knowledge. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
I can say that now. How do I quickly like bundle this? I think so. In addition to knowing Detroit is a huge part of me and that I love carbohydrates and chocolate very, very much, God, is such an important part of how I walk and who I am. So I applied to a TEDx talk several years ago here in Detroit, didn't get it. Then there was a pandemic last year where they didn't have it at all. Or they pulled from prior applicants. So this year they were hemming and hawing. Do they even have it? But in my spirit, I knew I was supposed to do it this year. So they had applications. I had a whole squad of people who reviewed my app, and then I submitted. And in my mind, the vision started coming together. The outfit, what I was going to say, how I was going to do it, what the slides were going to look like. I started having these visions. And then I didn't get it. And I was like, but this is the second time in my life where God has been very clear and said, this is yours. And it's the second time I've been told no about something when I knew that I heard that it was mine. So I emailed and asked what's going on. And they were like, Riana, we had you in our final round for everything. Like every cut we made, it looked like you were going to be there, but you had a similar topic to like 2 other people, and we didn't want to inundate them. We also wanted a very positive environment, given that we're coming out of quote unquote, coming out of this pandemic. So it didn't fit this year. And we look forward to you applying again next year. And it just didn't sit well with me because I was like, I don't know what this has to do with me. Y'all you could have dropped one of them other people, but whatever. So I accepted it and moved on. And then 3 days later, I get an email that says, can you reach back out to us? So I call them and they say, hey, one of the people talking about racism dropped. Can you do it? Now, this is 8 days before this TED Talk. And if what I didn't know, and I'm going to share this with y'all, TED Talks have no projectors for you. There are no scripts, not a single script, not a single, what is it called? Not a projector.
The teleprompter.
Not a single teleprompter.
That's shocking.
What I see is what y'all see. So they expect you to memorize it. So I'm going to repeat. I had 8 days to write, edit, and memorize this talk. Now, the sillier part, Dr. McClure, my mentor, Dr. Howard Stevenson, who has done a TED Big Talk, TED Med Big Stage Talk. His was 18 minutes. He had 6 months to prepare for it. We were, drilling him for months. He helps me to edit mine 2 days before. And when I say edit, I mean gut. So we had a whole new script 2 days before this talk. So I had 2 days while I'm teaching, while I'm, doing all the other work. But because God had already put it in my heart that it was mine, I already had the vision.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing that I'll say about this is that I ordered a dress because it was part of the vision. The dress came an hour before my talk. My girl had to go home, iron it, bring it to the place. I put it on, and 20 minutes later, I'm on that stage, right? Like, that's how much God was like, I'm going to just lay this out for you. It's yours, but it's going to be a little tough until you get there, but it's yours. And people who watched it were like, I had no idea, girl. Like, none of that stuff showed. You just came out and you just did your thing. But it's all, again, God just talking and flowing through me and helping people to understand some of these problems that have gripped us for so long, like racism. How can we explain it in a way where anybody not only can hear it, but is willing to hear it, is willing to let it seep in, versus racism is a problem, it's your fault, you did. I feel that way. It's here, it's in my spirit, but I'm not delivering it in that way.
Yeah. And that is such I'm thinking of how you started sharing your story growing up in Detroit and lacking resources, but still prevailing, still being able to go to college, excel, get your PhD. And so you were built for this moment.
Exactly.
You were built for this moment. I think that's sensational. We will have a link to the TED Talk where listeners, you can check it out in the show notes. Make sure you run those likes up, blow that up. I am really intrigued by founders, by creatives, and you are both of those things with being the founder of Our Mental Health Minute. an award-winning venture. Oh, I love if you could talk about this venture for a little bit.
Ooh, Dr. McClure, you keep making me blush and feel like
I
all
gotta
the
hype you
red.
up. Look, I'm over here just trying to be cool. I'm trying to be contained because I am a fan and I'm trying not to fan out. But
Oh, Lord. Okay, our Mental Health Minute with my co-creator, Dr. Sean Jones. We met each other at a conference in 2011, and our energy just collided. And it was clear that we both had a very similar vision and mission for mental health in the Black community. And one of the things we started talking about was, how do we get our message to grandmama and them? That was our tagline. How do we get our message to grandmama and them, cousin them? Like, how is somebody going to listen? And at that time, Vine was really popping, these like 6-second videos, right?
Mhm.
So we're like, okay, we can't do it in 6, but like the point is, how do we get brief videos to educate people? We knew YouTube was a platform that we could utilize at that time. So we started coming up with these minute/2/3 like long videos that explained concepts in ways that were relevant, funny, and could resonate with grandma or cousin, right? And it has evolved over time. So we've gone from YouTube to, Facebook to IG and Twitter. We've brought more people onto the team. We've done podcasts ourselves. We've just done a number of things to change it. But when you say award winning, I want to just comment on that. We, again, have been doing 2-3 minute videos. And here goes this competition from the American Psychological Association to create a 2-minute video about a topic. And we're just looking at each other like, it's us. Like,
Yeah.
we're literally, we don't even have to reshoot anything. We just submit this thing. So we submitted this video about stress and coping. We use a Lunchable to explain it. And it's one shot. We have a camcorder on top of a refrigerator. We just press record and we're talking to each other about how stress is like ingredients of this pizza. And it's 2 minutes long. And it ended up winning this competition where people had invested goo gobs of money into what they were doing. And the production value was out of this world. We had a one-shot camcorder sitting on top of a freezer and won this thing. And that was because our community voted for us. But also, again, my colleague and I have been built for this for so long. We have learned how to effectively communicate these things to folks in ways that are entertaining, fun, etc. So we ended up winning this award for something that, again, was just a passion of ours. That was an old video that we recycled for that purpose. So
Yeah, that's so
yeah,
cool. And it still seems super relevant now, especially that's how people are consuming content, right?
exactly.
Especially with TikTok, Instagram Reels. Like people want short clips, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, where they can consume information, but also be entertained. And because you had already been tapped into that, this was easy for you all. And so we'll include a link in the show notes to where people can access more information on that platform as well. Right. So you are also the director of Embrace. That's how you say it, right?
You got it.
Yep,
Yep.
you're the director of Embrace, which is a culturally based therapeutic program that empowers African American families to confront racial stress together while strengthening family ties. I love that. Can you break this down and talk a little bit about Embrace?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm cracking up because I'm like, dang, how many hats and jobs do I have?
You
Like
are
this, it
crushing
sounds like it
it.
sounds like a lot, but we'll get back to self-care in a minute.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the way that I've described this is before is there is a practice within Black families to have the talk, right? And for folks who may not be familiar with what that is, oftentimes if there is a racial challenge, Black people come together as a family to talk about what that challenge was, like being pulled over by the cops, and potentially some strategies to deal with that, right? So the talk has been something that we've had in our literature for decades now, and people have been investigating it and they've been asking questions about it or observing it. But I didn't see a lot about what they're doing with it. And again, if you just follow the hat on this, I call myself an interventionist. I look at the X to the Y. I look at this relationship between the problem and the solution. And it wasn't sufficient for me just to keep studying that relationship statistically. I wasn't comfortable just running models And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm saying for me, it wasn't sufficient. It wasn't enough. So I asked this question of what would happen if I took what Black families are already doing, and as a therapist, I took what we're doing and I married those things together. What would it look like if we brought the talk, or racial socialization is the term in the literature, to therapy? So I developed this 5-session therapy for Black families to engage in. And one of the most important findings from it is not what happens to the families. They improve, and that's what we anticipated. And it's a beautiful thing to see. I'm not trying to undersell that point. But to watch therapists, especially of other backgrounds, have these aha moments about Black families. Again, we went back to, you and I were talking about the system and the structure, being mindful of that. When you watch people of other backgrounds say, wow, I had never really understood how impactful racism was to these Black children, and now I see it and feel it and experience it. Once I realized it was also an intervention for therapists, I was like, just mind poof,
That's
right?
amazing.
Yes, that therapists would be able to change their perspective on Black children. And that has a rippling effect, not only in therapy, but if you're out in the neighborhood, or if your sister is a teacher and you're starting to share some of your beliefs, and then that teacher looks at another Black child differently, all of these ripple effects of what happens when we start to look at Black children differently from an individual and then a collective perspective. It just, that to me is the best finding that we could have.
Do you ever just take a second to reflect on all the things that you've done? Like, wow.
No. No, I don't.
Like what? So do you think, and I'm happy that you mentioned self-care, right? Because I feel like self-care
Yeah.
is becoming a buzzword. And if we're
Yes.
not careful, like we can do a lot more harm than good.
Yes.
So
Yep.
like how are you with all the things, with Embrace, with, giving TED Talks, with changing Detroit and South Central and all these things that you're doing? Like, how do you take time to like rejuvenate and to heal?
Yeah. I was doing a piss poor job of that, especially last year. We've said a number of times, for such a time as this, or like, built for this moment, right? I've felt that so deeply that if you look at my resume or my CV around June 1 of last year, so when George Floyd was murdered on May 26th, there was a lot of media that started swarming around what can we do? What sense do we make of this? So June 1 is when a lot of these things hit. And it's just like 10 per day, June 1, June 2, June 3, just, me talking to whoever I could, because I felt like I have to address this. I really believed in my heart, like I have to solve racism today. That's what it felt like, right? And as I was doing that, plus working my actual job, right, I started noticing the boundaries that I had so carefully started constructing for my life were just down. But I did that intentionally. I took all the barriers off my calendar. I said, whoever wants to talk, I'm open anytime. But that meant I was working about 85 hours a week, and I was not doing well. I had COVID early. It had impacted me pretty severely. And then I wasn't doing well at all to repair. Then my job was saying, well, in light of all of these things, it is a global public health crisis. It is a racism or a racial uprising. And you do all that work. So you should be publishing more. You should be writing more grants. You should be doing all of these things. So I was at a real point of exhaustion and had to very radically take care. So you're absolutely right that we're going to need to be very clear about what self-care actually is and is not. But radical self-care, this belief that if not you, then who? And like you absolutely have to be the one to take care of yourself because there's no system designed to support you like your own. I moved out to LA for 4 months so that I could walk to the beach every day, so that I could walk and get sunshine, so that I could hear the waves of the ocean, so that at 2 or 3 p.m., my day was done.
Mm-hmm.
And that I could have all the rest of that time to just be and breathe. So it took a pretty radical shift for me to have to leave a space that I had been in for a year up to that point, and the walls are gray and like the weather was gray. It was so much gray that I had to find the sunshine for me and know what that was for me. And I'm very privileged and blessed to be able to do that. Not everyone can, but I was in a space where I felt if I didn't take a radical change to my boundarylessness, that I would have succumbed to some pretty severe health problems and may not have been here today. So it takes time and acceptance and grace to be in a space where you're recognizing the problem and making moves to change it. But it also, for me, requires, if I come back to this space, I'll just repeat it. So I have to figure out, who can I hire to take off some of this? So I've hired several people this year to assist me. And that has been revolutionary, because sometimes you believe you're supposed to do it all by yourself. And you don't need no assistant. You're just 37. Like, all these things that might be said to you that you've internalized, you have to say, no, I would benefit from an assistant for the following reasons. And then you get one if you can afford it, and if it's, within your practice to do so. So I'm saying that for me, it took something pretty radical, and then I had to respond to it pretty radically. And then I had to think about, for me not to go back to that, what would I actually need? And for me, it's assistance.
What's so powerful about this, without you even knowing, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I had a recording prior to this episode. And in that recording, we talked about radical healing. And it was from the perspective of a Black woman. And, shout out to Dr. Celeste Malone. She's a Delta, right?
We are in love with all Greeks.
Yes. Shout out to the Divine Nine, right? You're an AKA, right?
Yes.
And
indeed.
Shout out to A5A, but there's that love there. But she's amazing. She is a brilliant scholar. She's a professor, and she is going to be she's the president-elect come July 2022. She will be only the second ever Black president of the National Association. And her presidential platform is going to be radical healing and liberation psychology. And just hearing you speak, like we have to embrace this radical healing, because we have been resisting for so long. And as you've mentioned, as others have mentioned, like, we're exhausted. And so we have to embrace this radical healing so that we can tap into joy and thriving.
And I would be remiss if I didn't say this, because the way that I typically speak to people is getting to the why. The why is such an important middle space before people can make behavioral change. To say out loud that there were actual real consequences to saying when you couldn't do something on your own or you couldn't complete a task is important. So if we start with a period of time during enslavement where you could not say, I can't pick enough, I can't be out in the sun, I'm not feeling well. That would be a lash. That would be your family getting sold off. That might be the end of your life. So we were taught for generations not to speak out. And then when we moved into other spaces, if you started talking about your inability to, that might mean that the only paycheck that your family is getting is now being taken away. We haven't had the luxury of saying that we're not well for a very long time. And we're moving into spaces where you have oftentimes white supervisors or bosses who are now saying, all of a sudden, have the things from the past actually impacted you? I'm curious. I want to know, should we have a day where we're stopping and celebrate? It's such a sudden shift that we know that they can't possibly understand, but we're being saddled with this history of why we would or would not do certain things. So we're mindful that if we say something, again, that could be a loss of income or consequence. So I want to acknowledge that why we say that we can't air our dirty laundry, talk to other people, stop, get help. That's a part of our history. But our history does not have to be our present, and certainly doesn't have to dictate what we do next. So I want to acknowledge it, so to your point, that we can be absolved of it and move to a space where we say what we actually need, not what we're used to, but what we need.
I feel like you're pouring into me just like personally right now. And I hope our listeners are getting something from that. But like, that's giving me the permission, and I'm sure you're the same way. I think we're similar in that, like, it's hard. It's hard to do those things that you're mentioning. It's hard to say no for all of those reasons that you mentioned. And like, I felt that too, to where I felt obligated, when entering into certain spaces. And for a lot of us, like, we might be the first to do something or the second to do something, or have this perception that I'm representing all people in my particular like category. And so like, I have to represent, or I can't let this group down. And so we have the weight of the world like on our shoulders. So whew, you are speaking right into me right now. You are spot
And
on.
myself, absolutely.
Yeah. But I will say this, like we deserve joy. We deserve
Yes,
to thrive and we deserve to
yes,
be happy.
yes.
And I want to shift a little bit to some happiness that you were able to partake in a while back. I'm not sure exactly how long ago, but you were on a game show. Let's
That's
make a
right.
deal.
You really did your research. Oh
I
my
did.
gosh.
I did a little bit of research. Shout out to Let's Make a Deal with Wayne Brady. I want to hear what that experience was like. And I kind of don't want to give it away, but like we're way past that. Like you should know. I'll put the link in the show notes. But the number that you picked at the end, and I won't say what happened, but that's
Yeah.
my line number. I'm number 6
Okay.
on my line.
Okay.
So I was
Shout
like,
out.
this is meant to be. Like that was a lucky number 6. But what was that experience like for you?
You're going to hear this theme again and again, but like God just continues to move through me in ways that could not be a coincidence. So I went out to LA because I was closing up shop at University of Southern California where I had my first faculty position. And then I was in a wedding. So I was out there just to kind of kick it. I was talking to my roommate and I was asking her if she was going to the Dodgers game. I invited my lab out and she was like, yeah. And then I asked, oh, how was Let's Make a Deal? Because she said she was going to go that day. She said, I'm going Wednesday. I said, you said Tuesday. We go to the text. I'm like, you said Tuesday, but she was like, oh, I meant Wednesday. So I was like, oh, I'm open. I have nothing to do that day. I'll go. So I go with her. And then when we go in, when we talked about gifts before, I've always been told I have this infectious personality that, when I walk into a room, it's just like, just lights and, it's just bubbly and always has been that way. There's so many pictures of me as a kid, just like being so extra. And so I walk in and they do this initial screener, just asking you a few questions. I've done acting, I've done our mental health minute, I've done all of these kind of fly by night things. So I'm used to questions that are just getting thrown at me. I didn't mean fly by night. I don't know what that was, but things that are flying, right? I'm used to just things that are improv-y, right? So that worked well. Then we go into this second room and you get to pick costumes if you didn't come in a costume. So I go to the costume person. He says, oh, how about this cheerleading outfit? I'm like, that makes sense. I'm such a spunky person. Like cheerleading makes a lot of sense. As he's handing it to me, he's like, here are the 4 things you need to know to get on the show. And I'm like, whatever. Like, I'm just kind of not, it's so much fun that I'm just like, whatever. So he hands it to me. They do like a practice round in the studio that we're in, and we're just having a ball. We're cracking up, just laughing. It's so much fun, whatever. We go to the actual studio itself. All these people who I had just been sitting in a room with are like getting called. And I'm like, this is so exciting. I'm so happy for Elizabeth and like all these people who I've just met, right? And then Wayne Brady, so then it goes to commercial break. And what the guy who told me about the uniform or the costume said was, you're never off. Don't you think that during the commercial breaks that you're off? You have to be on all the time. They're always looking at you from the control room. So they play the song Jump Around. As a hip hop head and as a silly person, I'm like, back it up, back it in. And here goes this camera and it's starting to come up my head. And I'm just like rapping the whole thing, just jumping around. When you get to the chorus, I'm literally jumping around. So then they, take the camera off and here comes Wayne Brady now. So we're all sitting back down and I'm literally reaching under my seat to get my inhaler because I have just gone hammer during this commercial break with Jump Around. And I hear him say, how about a cheerleader? Cheerleader, come on down. And I'm like, that's me. And so like I'm now running out of breath already, glistening because I'm sweating from jumping and like going hammer. Then he asks me, what I do. And I had just taken a job the day before at another university. So I'm almost about to say the wrong university. And he says, what public health message do you have for the people? And on the spot, I'm like, racism is bad for the mental health. Or like what I say, this public health message. And Wayne Brady looks at me and he's like, I didn't expect that, but like, it's a good answer. I was like, okay, cool. So it's just all these things that are just flowing out of my mouth. I'm having a ball. I'm going to end this story by saying The one thing you can't see is that I can't see the numbers. I'm really relying on the audience, but the last number was the spirit. Nobody yelled out any number at all. It was the spirit that moved me to choose that number because the camera crew is in between the stuff on the screen that you all see and where I am. So I can't see any of this stuff. I know it's the numbers 1 through 8, but I can't see what I've already chosen. I don't see what's left. So I just said a number, and when you watch it, you'll see me say it with such peace and calmness. But everyone in the audience is like, no, that's such a horrible, like, look at what you have left. Why would you choose that? And then we won't say the ending, but yeah.
So for our listeners, as soon as this episode is done, you have to go to the show notes and check out to see the ending. It is amazing. You don't want to miss it.
And again, God, it was all God giving all of the recommendations, all of the numbers. So yeah.
Amazing. And as we start to bring this episode to a close, from what I've read, you're a lover of all things trap music. And random, I am the biggest 3-6 Mafia fan. So I'm like, are you a 3-6 fan?
Excuse me. 3-6 UGK all day.
Okay, so we can talk about it. I wanted to know, in your perspective, which region or state has the best trap music and why?
I mean, it's the South, and then when you get between Memphis and Georgia, or in Atlanta rather, between Memphis and Atlanta, because Jeezy for me is really important. He's not trap all the way, but because he's a trap star, it's just like
trap or die. Like, come on now,
trap or die. But he's not what I would consider like fully trap. It's some of the beats that he uses are really trap.
Yeah.
But Memphis rappers are like, rest in peace, Young Dolph. Like Young Dolph and Key Glock were making some trap music this year and last year that I'm like, it was so good.
So you're a fan. Good. You know your stuff.
I'm a fan. I do.
I love it. And you know what's funny? Like Memphis, for me, it's Memphis. Hands down, Memphis.
It's Memphis.
I have family in Memphis. In fact, depending on when this podcast comes out, I'm actually going to be moving to Memphis. So yeah. So that's.
So now I really got to visit you. Yeah, you got to go to all the concerts.
All of them, but yeah.
With masks on.
Socially distancing if that's possible. But literally, like legit, this morning I'm watching an interview with Crunchy Black. Like I'm just.
Yes.
I am the biggest
Project Pat on Knife Talk. Like that's all I need to hear. We can cut Drake off, but. I mean, it's anyway. Yes, all day.
Who would you want to see in a versus with Project Pat?
I would want to get some new. Actually, Young Dolph was bringing it. I really enjoyed what Young was doing. So it would be a rest and honor situation where we would play some of his new stuff. But he was really bringing a different spin on, I think, and paying homage to what they were doing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. It's a life gone way too soon. Rest in peace, Young Dolph.
Yes.
But yeah, I would love to hear what you think about a Project Pat versus Bun B. Could you see that?
I was going to say that's not obvious, but I'll let you have that one. It is the answer we're supposed to go with. Yes, but like, that would be the best day on earth.
That would be amazing.
Besides Jeezy and Gucci, because I was running around my house. I couldn't tell me anything.
I was on edge the whole time though. Like, what's about to happen? What's about to go down?
We all got very nervous. Like, please don't bust anything out or like have any of the friends It was nerve-wracking for sure.
Yeah, but it was good. It was something definitely that the culture needed. So as we come to a close, any closing thoughts for the people?
Yeah, you asked me earlier about a book, and I told you it's forthcoming. So I don't have anything to say about it yet. I have like 3 words written in a note right on my iPhone. But I really want us to understand what healing is and what it means to actually repair what is broken. When we are in spaces where we're just trying to put band-aid approaches on anything, whether it's our mental health, whether it's the educational system, whether it's roads on our street, right? Like whatever it is that we're just trying to cover or patch will eventually show its fissures again. So I really want to talk about true healing which is coming back together, a fusing of what is broken and mending and taking the time and the resources to do that effectively. We know what that looks like with something like bones, for example, but what does it look like in our brains or the rest of our body and our mind? So I really just want to ask us to get to what that is for each of us so that we're actually taking the time and getting the resources we need to be whole again.
I could listen to you talk all day. It's just brilliant. It's nonstop. It's amazing. How can people find you on social media?
Yeah. So I always say if you have 10 fingers, you got to exhaust them to get to all my stuff. So Riana is the first hand, Riana, and then my second, Elyse, Riana Elyse, and you'll find me everywhere on that.
Amazing. I love it. I am so grateful for this healing centered conversation, for you coming on and having this discussion about all things mental health and Young Dolph and trap music and Wayne Brady and everything in between, but keeping Detroit at the center of it all. Thank you so much for this conversation. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to the Healing Centered podcast. Make sure that you follow us across all social